being broke and in Black America are two things that we as the youth, if you're an 80s baby and later, you've been told that those two things are okay to be by black people, by black society, like the civil rights generation and what I call the tweeners. The tweeners are those people, they weren't old enough to be out there, marching and putting on themselves. They're mostly like teenagers and younger. They're old enough to remember what black society was before the civil rights movement and then afterwards. See, I lump them into the civil rights generation as well. Like, you go back, if you were an adult during the 50s, then you're from that civil rights generation. The tweeners are mostly like teenagers, like 14 years old. You don't really have something to go out there and be marching for. Like, you can either be out there because your parents tell you let's go, or you can't be out there because your parents told you no. But the two things that they told us were okay from like 1980 and afterwards were, it's okay to be black and it's okay to be poor. Well, of course they would tell you that you couldn't change being black, and during the 80s, during the 70s rather, they just spent up all the money. Like, they had black-owned businesses, they had black neighborhoods, they had a community, they had an actual, economy that they built. That during the 70s, it was party time, and everybody went out and spent all their money and just had fun. And come the 80s, everybody's broke, they're starting to have kids, and they're like, it's okay to be broke, it's okay to be poor. So that's why we don't have a lot of the things that we don't have, is because the wealth got spent off. And then we got told, like, yeah, just fine being poor and broke. Like, y'all look back and you realize that some of your parents and grandparents didn't grow up in the projects. Like, you were like living in the projects, and then you realize that your mother, at one point in her life, she didn't live in the projects. Like, that was new. Like, you realize that her living in the projects was something that's new to her. Like, there was a day when she didn't live in the projects. And you don't even know about it. All you've seen from like 1981 is your mama living in the projects, and then you look back and you're like, wow, wait a minute, y'all had a house somewhere? Like, where was I? All I've seen you do is live in the projects. And people don't even know that because they spent up all the wealth. And then you start hearing about land that your family had or still has, and you're like, oh yeah, we can't utilize it because we got to pay taxes and such on it. And you're like, all you're thinking is like, well, why don't y'all pay the taxes? I mean, the property's going to be worth more than the taxes. And they're like, I really don't care about it. Like, how could you not care? Like, this land is valuable, you can utilize that. And they're like, I don't care. Because they took the money that they were supposed to maintain all of that. They took that money and they had a good time before you were born. And then now they're trying to get you to be okay with being poor. So you gotta look at people, and you gotta look at each other and realize that hood rat hole, broke culture, for like 2 generations, they had it, pounded in them that there's nothing wrong with being poor, that being poor is okay, that being poor and black is just fine. Like, money isn't important. Like, you don't, when you coming into the first generation, you're coming in with the belief that, the generation that's bringing you into the world, knows what they're talking about. Like, you believe in them. And you have like basically 2 generations that believe this one generation that, it's okay to be poor. It's okay to live in the projects. And you look back and you're like, hold on, wait a minute, y'all weren't living in the projects before the 1970s. Like, y'all weren't living like that in the 1950s and 60s. Like, they weren't, like, when you really look back at that far, and this is why they'll show you pictures of the 70s, but they won't show you pictures of the 60s and the 50s, and then you realize that, hold up, wait a minute, when I really look at it, you're living way worse in the in the 70s and 80s than you were in the 60s. Like, if this is how you were living in the 60s, why in the hell did you undo that? Real sexual gratification, and then they just wanted to not be around each other like they were done. They wanted to be around white people, like they were glorifying white people. And then they sold all that off and had their fun in the 70s, and then bam, okay, time to have kids. Well, we need to make them okay with the fact that we don't have anything. So we'll just tell them that having money isn't important. And they've been brought in the world like this. And I hate it when I see people go in and not actually break down that this generation is been taught to be broke. Like, you can teach poverty, and they've been taught to be broke, that being broke is okay. Like, how do you walk up to some woman that's living in the projects when she's been taught from the time she was born that having a bunch of bastard kids and living in the projects is just fine, nothing wrong with that? And all the women around her have been like, yeah, nothing wrong with that, that's okay. And then you're like, hey, that's not okay. And of course she's gonna fight you back on it. But you gotta realize where they're coming from. They've been taught that. Now, when you look at, that's why I always look and I get more angry at the civil rights generation, because you taught your kids degradation. Like, that was something that you provided for your kids to be. You provided for your kids to be, impoverished tools that can be abused by white supremacy and literally everybody else, just to save face with your own self. Man, that's horrible. But then you can't have the same exact judgment for people who were brought into the world taught that. Like, if you get taught, like, as an adult, if I teach you something, then you can judge somebody on basically what they can learn as an adult. But when you take somebody as a child and they're being taught that from the time they come into the world, that being poor and impoverished is okay, that producing bastard babies is okay, that being a criminal is okay, that being illiterate is okay, that being stupid is okay, then you're really talking about saying that something is okay that's really not okay. And you're getting mad at them because you're like, hey, look, I'm trying to teach you that this isn't okay. But they got taught that by mama. They got taught that by daddy. They got taught that by auntie, uncle, friend. They got taught that by people older than them who they're supposed to trust. Like, let me ask you this. When you were 6 years old, can you really look at at the seniors in your family, at your mama, your dad, your uncles, aunts, and could you really at 5 and 6 years old be like, yeah, I can't trust them? At 8 years old, I can't trust them. So imagine if they walk up to you and they tell you nothing ain't wrong with being broke. Then you're like, well, I guess nothing ain't wrong with being broke. They telling me this. Of course nothing wrong with being broke. Then you fast forward and now we today have to get that person out of that belief. And it's like, well, of course they have that belief. They've been taught that belief. I mean, it's hard to really, like, you also have to have some patience with them, because you're not dealing with the generation that brought it along and agreed to derail their children. You're dealing with the ones who got derailed. It's like, oh, well, I'm going to, be angry and upset and yell at you for being off the tracks. And you're like, yo, I landed here off the tracks. And I got told that, we don't need tracks. That's what you get told. I don't need tracks. And then now, really, what you have to do is show them and tell them how much they need tracks. Now, that's just financial ignorance. So I could be okay with getting taught like that. But then when you got, like, coonery, nah, that's just a learned trait, bro. Like, you just learn to be an idiot. Like, you know better. Like, you see people and they know better, and then because they're always making arguments against it, that's just on you, dude. Like, I can't help you when it comes to like to like that. Like, you being taught to be okay with being poor is a living condition. You being taught with being a coon is an activity. Which, yeah, I'll get into being coons being an activity on a later video. Well, if I ever get to a later video. See how this series of videos go, because this is my first time, so we're gonna see how this go, and hopefully I get to another video where I'm talking about coonery as an activity, because it's an activity like water polo and basketball.